HOA board denied my garden permit. I buried them in federal paperwork and got their president fired. It all started with a simple dream: to transform my bland backyard into a vibrant garden filled with colorful flowers and fresh vegetables. In my early 50s, as a retired civil engineer, I thought my plans would be met with enthusiasm, not resistance. To my dismay, when I submitted my garden permit to the local HOA, the response was immediate and dismissive. They denied my request without a clear reason, declaring that it didn't fit their community aesthetic. Feeling the sting of their draconian rules, I pulled up my sleeves, ready to fight back. Every day, as I walked through our meticulously manicured community, I could feel the eyes of the HOA members on me, judging my every move. I quickly realized that this wasn't just a battle over soil and seeds. It was a clash of wills against an unjust authority that thrived on control and conformity. They underestimated me, thinking a retired engineer wouldn't know how to navigate the bureaucracy they wielded so heavily. Little did they know, I was armed with years of experience in dealing with regulations and paperwork. This was just the beginning. Stay tuned as I unveil my plans to take back my rights and expose the hypocrisy of the HOA board. But first, if you enjoy stories of everyday people standing up against the odds, don't forget to subscribe for more. As I stood in my backyard, staring at the empty patch of dirt where my dreams of a flourishing garden lay, I couldn't help but reflect on how I ended up in this battle. I had spent my entire career as a civil engineer, designing infrastructure that improved people's lives. I believed in progress and community. My wife and I moved to this neighborhood because of its promise of a peaceful life in a charming, tight-knit community. We envisioned barbecues with neighbors, kids playing in the streets, and yes, my garden bursting with life. But the reality quickly dawned on me. The HOA was not a facilitator of community spirit, but a group that relished control. I remember the first time I approached them with my vision. Armed with sketches and a detailed plan, I went to the HOA meeting with spring in my step, eager to share my ideas. I had imagined them rallying behind the idea of sustainability and community beautification. Instead, I encountered cold stares and thinly veiled contempt from the board members. They dismissed my visions as if they were weeds in a garden they had meticulously pruned. "We feel it doesn't align with our standards," one member stated, her voice dripping with condescension. At that moment, I felt a surge of indignation. The words echoed in my mind as I walked away, feeling like an outsider in a place meant to feel like home. This wasn't just about a garden. It was about standing up to unjust authority that felt perfectly entitled to dictate the terms of life in our own homes. I recalled a time during my career when I faced tight deadlines and overwhelming regulations. I had learned to navigate these situations with patience and keen attention to detail. I resolved to apply the same tenacity to this situation. I pondered my next move. Sitting at my dining table one evening, I pulled out my laptop and began researching everything I could about the HOA's governing documents and rules. What I found stunned me. There was a web of regulations filled with loopholes and ambiguities. While they relied heavily on the apparent strictness of their rules, I realized that they couldn't assume control over every detail of our lives without challenge. "You can't suppress creativity in nature forever," I muttered, feeling the fire of determination rise within. As I dug deeper, I became more resolute in my purpose. I began documenting every shred of correspondence I'd had with the HOA regarding my garden permit, the application, the denial letters, and all the condescending comments made during those meetings. I knew what I had to do. I would turn their own rules against them, armed with my knowledge of civil engineering and legal documentation. Suddenly, the ban on my garden morphed into a reckless vendetta. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It became a symbol of resistance against an oppressive regime. I realized that my path forward required not only strategic planning, but also a keen understanding of the very regulations they wielded like swords. Each day I would walk my block and feel the increasing pressure of their watchful eyes, silently judging my every action. Yet, with every little infringement they overlooked, I felt my plan shaping up more meticulously. As the days turned into weeks, I sensed an ominous storm brewing. I would catch snippets of conversations among my neighbors about how the HOA was planning to tighten regulations even further. Intrigued and slightly worried, I knew I couldn't just sit idly by while they continued to wield unchecked power. I had to act. Then it hit me. This could be the perfect opportunity to gather support and build a coalition. To do this, I needed to expose the board's hypocrisy. I approached my neighbors carefully, sharing my vision not just of a garden, but of a community standing together against unnecessary oppression. In the back of my mind, my heart raced, knowing the HOA had sensed my resistance. They might have the upper hand for now, but I was ready to expose them for the controlling bodies they truly were. If you believe that standing up against community injustices is crucial, remember to like this video. The facade of communal harmony was about to crack as I prepared to unveil my plan, piece by piece. Armed with knowledge and determination, I knew the tide was beginning to turn. And this was just the beginning of the fight I'd take to the HOA if I was to reclaim my right to a garden. Little did they know, their authority was about to face its biggest challenge yet. It didn't take long for the first sign of the HOA's passive-aggressive behavior to emerge. One sunny afternoon, as I was beginning to plot out my backyard, I noticed a folded piece of paper tucked under my doormat. Curiosity piqued. I bent down to retrieve it, my heart racing as I unraveled the note. The message was blunt. We've noticed your recent activities and would like to remind you of our community ordinances regarding property alterations. Any further actions will result in penalties. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. It was as if my desire to grow a bit of life in my yard was an act of rebellion worthy of a warning. The irony of their message did not escape me. Here they were, claiming to act in the interest of the community, while simultaneously stifling a potential source of beauty and food. It felt absurd, and I could feel the anger boiling within me. I knew they were trying to intimidate me into submission. But what they didn't realize was that their threats would only fuel my determination. As if that note weren't enough, whispers began to circulate among my neighbors. At the annual block party, I overheard a couple of residents discussing how they'd noticed increased surveillance by the HOA. Comments like, "They're just waiting for someone to slip up," drifted into my ears. I felt a chill run down my spine, realizing that I had become a target, a pariah in my own community, simply because I dared to dream of greenery. I decided to keep my ears open. Every exchange became an opportunity to collect information. I would attend HOA meetings, where the tension was palpable, and the board members spoke with an air of superiority. They were enthralled with their positions of power, treating residents like children who needed constant supervision. One night, I even watched as one board member chastise a neighbor for putting out what she deemed to be inappropriate holiday decorations. Things were getting out of hand. I had actually come to feel a sense of isolation. Without any formal communication, neighbors who once welcomed me now avoided eye contact, as if I were a contagious disease. And then, just when I thought things couldn't escalate further, I received a real dagger to my plans. A summons. The HOA had formally decided to impose a fine based on a supposed violation of community standards simply for my yard's untamed state. Trying to hold back my anger, I tore the letter open in disbelief. This was their way of pushing me out, I realized, by punishing me financially for my desire to foster some life. One of the requirements of the HOA was impeccable landscaping, and somehow they thrived on maintaining that uniformity. But who decided that nature couldn't be a little messy, a little organic? Staring at that letter, intense rage began bubbling forth. I wouldn't sit back and let them bully me any longer. It was time to take a stand. By then, I had done plenty of digging into the community's governing documents, and I knew the guidelines inside and out. But the letter was also a blessing in disguise. It gave me valuable information on their procedures, their rules, and most importantly, their legal limitations. This was a critical moment for me. It was time for malicious compliance. I decided to use their own rules against them. Instead of ignoring their unwarranted fine, I meticulously prepared a formal response. I outlined every violation they had committed when they imposed a fine, citing their own procedures and emphasizing that I was aware of my rights as a homeowner. I even referenced how my garden was well within the bounds of what was typically allowed when you dissected their legal jargon. I hit send on the email and leaned back, feeling a sudden sense of relief intermingled with anticipation. I wanted them to know that I was no longer the quiet, docile neighbor they could push around. But I knew still had to think bigger. I took a step back and created a strategy to garner support. I started crafting a well-researched proposal to share with more of my neighbors, an outline of the benefits of gardening, not just for oneself, but the entire community's sense of cohesion and health. While the HOA was fostering division, I wanted to foster unity and demonstrate that we could all work together to create something beautiful and productive. I envisioned a neighborhood turned lush with home gardens full of vegetables and flowers, all while undoing the grip the board had over our lives. As I meticulously laid down the foundation of my plan, I felt it was crucial to branch out and rally support. I began organizing small gatherings to discuss the benefits of community gardens and how we could appeal to the HOA to revise their regulations. I set out notices inviting everyone to share their own experiences with the HOA's oppressive rules, hoping my neighbors would feel inspired and united in this cause. In those moments, as we discussed, debated, and shared stories over cups of coffee, I realized something profound. The strength of community was far more potent than any rules the HOA could throw at us. If you believe that change is possible when people come together, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. This was just the preparation phase, the calm before the storm, and I could feel the momentum building. It wouldn't be long before I would unveil my garden plan, and the paper trail I had wisely constructed, ready to turn the tide against the HOA's unwarranted reign. The situation escalated quickly after I received that ominous fine. I was caught in a hellish whirlwind of HOA harassment, and they seemed to relish every moment of it as they tightened their grip around my dreams of a garden. It became clear to me that this wasn't merely a personal conflict. It was a deeply entrenched power dynamic, and I was on the receiving end of their ruthless enforcement. But I was not about to back down. Instead, I chose to channel that anger into resolve. With every passing day, their antagonism became increasingly apparent. My backyard, which once represented hope and vibrancy, felt like a battlefield, a desolate ground stifled by the weight of the HOA's cruelty. Suddenly, that folded paper under my doormat became symbolic of something far more insidious. It was a reminder that my battle against the HOA had now turned into a serious confrontation. I felt the isolation creeping in as neighbors turned their backs on me, not just from fear of the HOA, but because they had witnessed my struggle and chose to remain passive. I was determined to change that. I armed myself with knowledge, diving into those governing documents with the focus of a hawk locking onto its prey. They had to adhere to proper protocol for issuing fines, and I knew that if I thoroughly dissected their lazy bureaucratic actions, loopholes would surface like weeds. I built a comprehensive binder with copies of every correspondence I'd had with the HOA, including that condescending denial letter. It felt liberating to organize my thoughts and charges against them in a systematic way. I began to create a project plan that raised the stakes. My garden would not just be a serene retreat. It would serve a higher purpose. It would expose the HOA's hypocrisy to the entire community. So what was my next step? Clear the space in my mind and focus on collaboration. My plan had to be strategic. In a moment of clarity, I realized that the HOA relied on fear and conformity to maintain their authority. If I could rally my neighbors together, using their own words against them, I would weaken that fear barrier. Together, we could form an invisible army, one composed of locals united under the shared yearning for betterment. To embroil others in my quest, I crafted a stunning and organized charter that not only outlined the benefits of gardening, but also debunked the HOA's power over our creativity and independence. The moment had come to act, and I hosted a gathering at my home. The night was humid, but my spirit remained high. I placed flyers underneath neighbors' doors urging them to attend. Upon entering my backyard, adorned with drawings of what it could look like if I were to cultivate a beautiful garden, a sense of disbelief washed over them. They hadn't witnessed anything like it before, as the potential shimmered in front of their eyes. One neighbor, who had previously held a stalwart stance against me, now sat wide-eyed, her apprehension transforming into curiosity. As we sat around a makeshift table, I carefully presented my strategy. Imagine, I began, a community garden, a collective space that sustains us amidst the oppressive regulations of the HOA. We could cultivate our own food, share resources, and regain a piece of autonomy. People might not realize how much life can flourish when we nurture it, rather than suppress it. In those moments, I witnessed the spark ignite. I opened the floor for discussion, sharing stories of the HOA's unreasonable demands and the chaos it produced within our lives. More people began to feel emboldened to speak up. One resident recounted how their application for a bicycle shed was denied without explanation, while another shared a similar tale of having a holiday decoration torn down. Thinly veiled aggression danced in the air. It felt electric, and I knew I could build on that momentum. My heart swelled with hope as they resonated with my plight. We have the power to stand up as a community. I continued, my voice steady with conviction. The HOA might hold legal authority over us, but they can't dictate our hearts, our homes, or our right to live freely. We can invoke change together, through gardening, through advocacy, and through patience. That night, I saw the tide beginning to shift. Many of my neighbors were eager to join the movement. I could feel them relinquishing their fears, slowly recognizing that they were not alone. The HOA's veneer of authority was beginning to show cracks, and within that shared vulnerability, I sensed the scent of determination blooming, a solidarity that had the potential to spread like wildflowers in a once untamed field. From this gathering, I knew we could draft a petition for the HOA, not just in my garden, but to challenge the oppressive rules that stifled our community spirit. Armed with signatures and shared stories, we could submit evidence of the injustice that was spread across our neighborhood. I had become a beacon of hope, rallying potential allies to share this fight for our collective rights. It would not just be a garden anymore. It would be a full-fledged movement. As I embraced the growing solidarity amongst us and designed the petition, I realized it was time to take things to the next level. We were about to unearth that hidden potential and transform it. Our gardens were now the symbols of our fight for freedom against a regimented HOA. However, I could already sense the HOA watching us closely, perhaps feeling threatened by this newfound unity. With that in mind, I braced for impact, knowing full well that the real battle was yet to come. But at that moment, I felt optimistic. We were on the cusp of something revolutionary, and collectively, we were ready to reclaim our neighborhood. I would show them that they couldn't keep suppressing the community spirit that lived within us all. With the momentum of our neighborhood gathering fresh in my mind, I felt compelled to take tangible action. The idea of a petition was stirring deep within me, fueled by the collective voices of my neighbors, each echoing their frustrations with the HOA. Inspired, I began drafting a comprehensive proposal aimed not just at the board, but at fostering a sense of unity amongst us all. The goal was clear: to demand a reevaluation of the restrictive regulations that had stifled our community's spirit for too long. Every night, I would hunch over my dining table, scribbling down ideas and discussing them with my wife, who stood by me through thick and thin. We need to illustrate the benefits of community gardening, I said, typing fervently, not just for us as individuals, but for the entire neighborhood. She nodded in agreement, suggesting we include testimonials from residents who faced similar challenges with the HOA. We began gathering these personal stories, every lived experience adding depth and weight to our case. The petition needed to reflect our collective outrage, as well as our desire for positive change. As I crafted the document, I couldn't shake the feeling of righteous indignation. The HOA had gone too far in their attempts to control us. This wasn't just about my garden anymore. It was a crusade against conformity. With each signature we collected, I felt like we were building an army, one driven by the longing for freedom and the bonds of community. Once I felt the draft was solid, I reached out to neighbors eager to rally support. Armed with a cleaned-up copy of the petition, I organized another meeting. This time, I planned not just to share our individual stories, but to present a unified front. I picture a room filled with every neighbor feeling empowered, aware that change was within our grasp. As the day approached, I buzzed with excitement, tinged with nerves. On the night of the meeting, as I set up chairs in my backyard, I could feel the weight of anticipation hovering in the air. Neighbors trickled in, and soon I was surrounded by familiar faces, all tired of being silenced by the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. Eagerly gathered around a fire pit, I started by recounting my own road to resistance. I shared my initial dreams of a garden, how their rejection ignited a spark deep within me, and how I knew we were not alone in our grievances. As I began to outline the particulars of the petition, I could see understanding dawning on people's faces. The embers of hope were beginning to flicker. This is our chance to stand united against an HOA that thrives on our fear, I urged, pausing beneath the flickering glow of the lights. It's about time we push back. People began to chime in with stories of their own, how the HOA fined them for minor lawn imperfections, or rejected their plans for personal enhancements to their homes. As we shared these tales, my neighbors leaned into the fight, their voices stronger and more confident with each passing minute. Together, we began to shape the petition line by line, a document that detailed not only our grievances but the positive community impact of gardens. Fresh produce, beautified spaces, and a re-established sense of togetherness. One neighbor suggested we include a section demanding an overview of the HOA's procedures, questioning their rigid enforcement of rules that appeared selectively applied. I was thrilled. Each addition only fortified our resolve. As days turned into a week, I was amazed at how our community was rallying. Social media buzzed with coordinated plans for handing a petition to the HOA, and I orchestrated conversations in our local groups. We spread the word like wildfire, with each neighborhood distributing pamphlets inviting everyone to take a stand at the upcoming HOA meeting. This was a real turning point, a call to arms. When the meeting day finally arrived, the energy was electric. We all dressed in matching garden hats as a quirky show of solidarity. No one expected such a display, but I knew that we were more than just individuals. We were an assembled force ready to confront the oppressive authority of the HOA. As we stepped into the meeting room, I could feel the board members' uneasy glances glide over us. They had become complacent, too accustomed to their easy reign of control. I opened the floor, introducing our petition. With a shaking voice but a ground of resolve, I shared our collective stories of oppression and the thirst for liberties. Then came the moment of reckoning. Individual neighbors took turns to recount their own battles, from enforced monotypes of landscaping to unwarranted fines. Each person stood taller as they recounted their grievance, building an undeniable case that the HOA was not acting in the community's best interest, but rather in their own self-preserving agenda. As faces in the audience began to shift from indifferent to attentive, I felt a rush of power. It was no longer just about my garden, but about reclaiming our rights, liberties, and dignity. We attached the signatures collected, a nigh impressive demonstration that the HOA could not ignore. That volley of determination was punctuated with the resounding echoes of solidarity, a clarion call impossible for them to dismiss. This was not only a fight for my backyard. We had transformed it into a battle for every street, every neighbor, and every voice that had been silenced by unreasonable control. We would not let them dictate how we lived in our own homes any longer. As we left that meeting, despite not knowing how the board would respond, one thing resounded clear in my heart. We had taken the first steps toward change, resolutely exposing the hypocrisy of the HOA. The stakes were higher now, and I sensed the winds of change beginning to blow in our favor. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning, and we were ready for whatever came next. The HOA board's response to our petition was about as predictable as the sunrise. Within days, I received a cold, bureaucratic letter in the mail addressing our demands with a heavy dose of dismissal. They would not consider revising their regulations. Instead, they insisted that our request for community gardens was not only impractical, but a violation of the established aesthetic. We believe the current guidelines maintain the harmony of our lovely neighborhood. It stated flatly, devoid of any acknowledgement of our voices, or the mounting discontent from the community. Reading that letter made my blood boil. It wasn't just an administrative note. It was a blatant dismissal of our collective needs and aspirations. They had crossed a line, and I could feel the righteous anger surging through my veins. This was no longer just about my backyard garden. This was a declaration of war against an oppressive regime. I was determined now, more than ever, to take action. Through my years as a civil engineer, I had learned how to tackle complex bureaucracies with sharp wit and strategic thinking. I knew that the HOA's rigidity could be used against them. I dug deeper into the community's governing documents, finding obscure provisions that could expose their hypocrisy. I noted that a clause regarding community gardens existed, which stated that they could be permitted during annual evaluations based on community input. This gave me a glimmer of hope. The ball was firmly in our court, and I decided to exercise our rights to that clause. I rallied the neighborhood again, organizing another meeting to discuss our next steps. This time, however, I would not only gather support. I would prepare a comprehensive report that included examples of successful community gardens in other neighborhoods. We had to show the board that our requests weren't unreasonable, but rather a unique opportunity to enhance property values and foster community spirit. As I presented the findings during our gathering, I could sense the resolve growing among my neighbors. We talked about how community gardens could improve our neighborhood, environmentally, socially, and economically. Imagine kids playing proximity to the patches they help grow. I proposed, outlining benefits that extended beyond just aesthetics. The fervor in the room reminded me of the shifting winds of change in our small community. With a unified front, we each committed to gathering more signatures to back my proposal alongside the report I had meticulously crafted. It became clear this would not simply be a fight for my garden, but a broader campaign that challenged the HOA's outdated thinking. We deserved to be listened to, and we were ready to demand it. As I began drafting the formal submission, I could almost hear the incessant ticking of the HOA board's clock, their time of unchecked power nearing its end. I included extensive details in our report. Financial analyses of community gardens, studies showcasing increased home values in neighborhoods that adopted similar projects, and letters of support from gardening associations. I even reached out to local environmentalists who shared our vision and promised to attend the next HOA meeting. Eager to make a lasting impact, I included testimonials that illustrated how community gardens could combat food deserts and provide fresh produce. I felt an overwhelming sense of camaraderie spread through the group as we crafted the submission together. Everyone was brainstorming ideas, feeling the flames of activism ignited within them. As we finalized the report, I couldn't help but marvel at how quickly everything had escalated. During this time, I had also been careful not to provoke the HOA too much, an intentional strategy to keep them on edge while preparing our documents. I wasn't trying to push them directly, but instead orchestrating a shift that put the pressure on them to respond positively to our request. They were now swimming against an undercurrent that included not just my voice, but the voices of many residents who had been silenced for too long. With our meticulously crafted report in hand, and fueled by collective passion, we set a date to present our case at the upcoming HOA meeting. As the day approached, the energy was palpable. I felt the excitement tinged with a hint of nerves. I knew that the board would not take kindly to being challenged, and they would fight back, likely with a barrage of procedural red tape. But this time we would not back down. We were prepared for their resistance. On the night of the meeting, the air was thick with anticipation. I arrived early to ensure everything was organized on my end, my heart pounding in my chest as I took a deep breath and mentally prepared myself for the battle ahead. As neighbors filtered into the meeting room, everyone was wearing those matching hats again, a peculiar but powerful show of solidarity. Repeated themes of community, hope, and resilience echoed among our gathered ranks. As the HOA president opened the meeting and launched into his usual report, I could feel a sense of urgency in the air, buzzing like static electricity. And then it was our time. I stood up, handed out copies of our report, and began to speak, feeling the weight of the moment pressing against my shoulders. I stepped into my role not just as a representative of my garden, but as the voice of change, fueled by the frustration and hopes of all my neighbors. As I spoke, I felt a wave of empowerment wash over the room. The eyes of my neighbors brightened with recognition, fueling what I could only hope would be a pivotal moment in our struggle. I articulated our desire for the community garden, while addressing their claim that it contradicted traditional aesthetics. I stressed that the true essence of community lies in embracing diversity, not stifling it. As the board began to respond, I steeled myself for an attack. I could already sense their hesitancy, as they realized they would not be able to simply brush us off. The discussion ignited fierce debates, and gradually, I started to feel hopeful. We had opened a dialogue that the HOA could no longer ignore, and their power was beginning to fray beneath our collective voices. As the meeting progressed, discussions became impassioned. I could see my neighbors finally finding their voices. We had transformed a passive gathering into an arena of spirited debate, and there was a palpable sense of empowerment surging through the room. Each point I made about the value of community gardening was supplemented by nods of agreement, rallying support that felt electric. The board's comfort in their pedestal of authority was quickly turning into discomfort. They could no longer ignore us or simply dismiss our concerns. To my surprise, one of my neighbors, Carol, stood up to share her story. I applied for a small shed to store my gardening tools, and the board denied my request. They said it didn't fit the neighborhood vibe. It's frustrating to feel like we aren't allowed to personalize our homes or have the simple joy of gardening without being penalized or scrutinized. The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Here was someone else's frustration echoing mine, bringing our struggle to life. Feeling emboldened, I addressed the board. What you call aesthetic control is stifling our individuality and passion. Look around you. This is not just a fight for my garden. It's a fight for the heart of our community. If we can't even nurture our own gardens, can we really say we are free in our own homes? Their faces shifted from casual dismissal to examining the signatures on our report, poring over the names of those who stood behind us. I could sense the unease in their ranks. The tension grew as residents started to vocalize their support. One by one, more stories emerged, testament after testament to the oppressive nature of their rigid regulations. I would never have thought of myself as a leader in this fight, but here I was catalyzing a movement that our community so desperately needed. Finally, the HOA president stood up. His dismissal to change remained evident, but I could see cracks beginning to form in his practiced confidence. Our rules exist to maintain the safety and harmony we've worked so hard to build, and while we appreciate your passion, we must also adhere to a standard, he stated, his voice dripping with condescension. It was the same spiel we had heard before, but this time there was an unmistakable note of hesitation. Determined to not let the moment pass, I pressed on. But what you consider harmony stifles our creativity and the community spirit. We are advocating for a chance to cultivate not just gardens, but connections. Connections among neighbors, families, and friends. I watched as those in attendance nodded and murmured in agreement. I could feel my heart racing with each passing moment. After several back and forths, it became clear the board was running out of counterarguments. They were cornered. I could see them frantically shuffling through their notes as they spoke to one another in hushed tones. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I felt a spark of confidence energizing me, reminding me of all the time spent planning, organizing, and rallying support. My experience as a civil engineer was coming to bear fruit for something more significant than I could have imagined. Eventually, I asked for a vote to officially propose that we initiate a community garden pilot program. The groans of the board were mixed with the cheers of my neighbors. We had achieved what none had thought possible. We had organized, mobilized, and brought our plight to light. Now, the board would have to contend with actual demands and reality of their refusal to budge on their strict guidelines. The HOA president, his face a mix of disbelief and frustration, reluctantly agreed to discuss the proposal further. It was not an outright acceptance, but it was a breach in the facade, a glimmering ray of hope. The tide was turning, and they would have to negotiate. As the meeting adjourned, I felt lighter than air. We had walked in as individual residents, unsure and nervous, but we emerged united under the banner of a common cause. It was amazing to see people who once avoided speaking out bravely sharing their thoughts, realizing together the power of the collective voice. Outside the meeting room, neighbors exchanged high fives and laughter. It felt exhilarating. "I can't believe we did that," Carol exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. I couldn't help but smile, soaking in the communal joy we had just ignited. But amidst the celebration, I knew that this was only the beginning. The board would not yield easily, and there would be more battles to come. They would undoubtedly regroup and strategize how to quash our newfound momentum. But I was ready. More than ever, I felt confident. This fight was not a path walked alone. It was a journey we would forge together. And together, we would unveil the layers of hypocrisy that veiled the true purpose of the HOA as protectors of our community. Stay tuned as our journey takes an unexpected turn. What I uncover next could change everything. Don't forget to subscribe for updates on our mission as we expose the truth behind the HOA's iron grip on our lives. The next few weeks unfolded like a high-stakes chess match, a battle of strategy and resolve. With the HOA board's reluctant agreement to consider our proposal for a community garden, I felt the tide of momentum shift further into our favor. But I also knew I had to be ready. They would not concede willingly. The realization struck me. I would need an arsenal of information, coalition-building tactics, and public support to make our vision a reality. I began to meticulously prepare for the next HOA meeting, ready to arm myself with even more data. It was time to not just react to their refusals, but to turn the tables and dictate the terms of engagement. I delved deeper into the research on community gardens, making connections with local gardening organizations to gather compelling statistics and case studies of successful gardens in neighborhoods similar to ours. I even enlisted some experts to aid our cause. One day, a local agriculture extension agent and community garden advocate named Tom visited me. He was enthusiastic about what we were trying to accomplish. You're not just creating a garden here. You're fostering community. And communities are thriving on gardens across the nation, he said, his passion infectious. Tom agreed to join us for the next presentation to the HOA, bringing his expertise and credibility. At our next neighborhood meeting, I could hardly contain my excitement. I stood in front of my neighbors, who were now becoming seasoned activists, all of them fired up and ready to stand together in solidarity for the next round in our fight against the board. I succinctly outlined our strategy. We need to show the HOA how a community garden aligns with their stated mission of enhancing property values and fostering community spirit. But we won't just be presenting facts. We're going to personalize this endeavor. Each of us has a story, and stories resonate louder than any statistic. As we brainstormed, I encouraged everyone to share their own experiences that highlighted how community gardening could positively impact lives. Everyone contributed. It was powerful to hear tales of trips to farmers' markets, the joy of watching children dig in the dirt, and how gardening had once brought them closer to loved ones lost. It became abundantly clear. This was not just my dream for a garden. It was a shared dream that belonged to every one of us. We developed a presentation that encompassed strong statistical arguments for community gardens, how they could reduce crime, increase property values, lower resident stress levels, and improve air quality. Tom prepared a visual presentation with charts and images that captivated the audience. It was a professional display that I hoped would catch the board's attention with its seriousness and dedication. On the night of the meeting, I swear I could feel my heart thrumming against my chest as we filled the seats. There was a buzz in the air, which felt electric as HOA board members filed in with their usual arrogance, although I could see a flicker of concern in their eyes as they spied the crowd. My neighbors were energized, seemingly more unified than ever. The board's confidence began to waver, and I seized the moment. As I stood up to present, the warmth of the collective support enveloped me, and I began to speak with newfound clarity. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, we appreciate your willingness to explore this idea of a community garden, but we must challenge the notion that it's impractical or detrimental to our neighborhood. I invite you to hear our stories, witness our aspirations, and see how a thriving garden could happen here right under your guidance. I paved the way for Tom to share his insights. He jumped in, talking with passion about the incredible impacts community gardens had across the country. Studies show that areas with gardens report higher levels of neighborly interaction, reduced crime rates, and increased appreciation for local flora and fauna. Just imagine the possibilities for our neighborhood, where children learn to plant and harvest from a shared garden and families gather to cook meals together. The room started to buzz. It was tangible. We had ignited something in the audience. More residents expressed their thoughts, weaving their tales into the fabric of our presentation. My heart surged as I witnessed voices once stifled rise in unison with a fervor I had not expected. One by one, residents delivered personal testimonies about how gardening had transformed their lives. The board members looked uneasy, glancing at each other, their facade of unwavering authority beginning to crack. When it came back to me, I seized the moment again. So, I urge you, board members, as guardians of this community, consider the positive change this garden would sow. Let us innovate, let us evolve, and let us embrace the opportunity to create connections among neighbors. This is our chance to rewrite the narrative from oppression to empowerment. Once we finished, I took my seat, heart pounding in anticipation, while the board members huddled together for a discussion, whispering intently. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety and expectancy, Our voices had begun to penetrate their armor of indifference. I knew they couldn't simply dismiss us anymore. They had to react. When the HOA president finally returned to address the crowd, he cleared his throat. While we appreciate your enthusiasm, community gardens do require careful consideration. However, seeing the level of passion here tonight, we can certainly discuss creating a trial community garden program. A wave of applause surged through the room. We had broken through. After the initial expressions of victory, I knew there would still be challenges ahead. But for the first time, it felt like we were moving forward. As the meeting adjourned, I kept reminding myself that the battle was not yet won. But I also felt a sense of pride and relief washing over me as my neighbors tapped me on the shoulder and cheered in excitement. We had awoken a slumbering monster we sought to tame, but it was far from caged. Walking out that night, I felt empowered. Something essential had shifted in our community, a promise that we could transform our landscape, both physically with gardens and emotionally with our communal spirit. Yet I had a nagging feeling that the HOA would respond with renewed tactics to undermine our success. And as I turned to my neighbors, I knew we needed to prepare for the next move in this escalating chess match with the HOA. As the dust settled from our victorious presentation, mingled with triumph was a prickling anxiety of impending retaliation from the HOA board. I couldn't shake the feeling that our brief window of success would result in swift action on their part, with their authority challenged publicly. I knew they would regroup and strategize on how to stifle our momentum, and I was determined to be prepared for whatever they would throw our way. The following weeks were tense. I kept close tabs on HOA communication and organized follow-up meetings with my neighbors, eager to keep the energy high and our objectives clear. We began drafting a timeline and action plan for making the community garden a reality, maintaining our optimism despite the anxiety hanging heavily in the air. But the HOA's silence became deafening, every moment sending chills down my spine as I predicted their next move. Then came the email. It was an invitation to a special meeting, ostensibly to discuss the proposed community gardens and potential amendments to neighborhood guidelines. The HOA had decided to take us seriously, at least on the surface. But I sensed an undercurrent of insincerity, as they often wrap their intentions in layers of legal language and formalities. My gut told me that this would be their chance to either placate us or trap us with red tape. Are we ready for this? I asked during our subsequent neighborhood meeting, scanning the faces of my neighbors, who seemed weary but unwavering in their resolve. No more silence. We will express our passion for what this community garden represents, not just flowers and vegetables, but community and freedom. Heads nodded in solidarity. With that energy flowing through the room, we resolved to go all in. We had to make this meeting a pivotal moment in our quest. On the night of the meeting, the atmosphere was electric. We all gathered in our signature garden hats, ready to face the HOA once again. The tension hung thick in the air as we took our seats, determined to channel our collective momentum into something unstoppable. When the board commenced proceedings, I could see their carefully orchestrated facade of control hanging by a thread. As the evening progressed, the board members introduced the agenda item regarding the community garden. Their president, the same one who had previously brushed us off with condescending remarks, opened the floor for discussion. I felt apprehensive but emboldened. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the moment to lay all cards on the table. Up I stood, heart pounding, adrenaline coursing wildly through me. What we're proposing is not solely a garden. It is an embodiment of who we are as a community, and a stronghold against the stifling governance that has long dictated our lives. This garden symbolizes our voices, our dreams, and our aspirations. Each word rolled off my tongue with fervor. You could feel the tension lift as some board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I shifted into presentation mode, recapping the stories of passion and community we shared in past meetings. We have compiled extensive research and testimonials. Our neighbors are eager to contribute to this shared space. The community flowers need to be tended to, not just by those of us who desire the garden, but by the HOA itself, guiding us in our foundations. I passionately relayed the benefits documented: improved mental health, increased property values, and strengthened community ties. Just as I had expected, one board member countered my tone with a smirk. Well, It sounds charming in theory, but let's discuss the logistics. Who will oversee this project? What rules will we need in place to ensure it fulfills our standards? Rhetorical questions shot out like arrows, aiming to pierce the heart of our vision. But I was ready. On the contrary, I invite you to trust us. Our community is capable of self-governance. We do not need micromanagement from the top down. Our strength lies in coming together to cultivate a thriving garden with shared rules established by neighbors, not just dictated from an opposition stand. I knew that I had struck a chord. Energy shifted in the room as board members looked to one another, mumbling quietly. This is about giving back to the community, about fostering the harmony you claim to want. We want to nurture creativity and autonomy. I could feel enthusiasm bubbling among my neighbors, who echoed their support in murmurs. Suddenly, an older woman from the far back stood up. I've watched this neighborhood turn into a lifeless display case. Gardening has always been a means to connect with my family and my neighbors. Denying that is denying the essence of what a community is meant to be. Her passion ignited reactions among those present, the air thick with newfound determination and unity. After our testimonials, the board could no longer ignore the empathy and vitality that blossomed in the room. They could either fight against this growing tide or find a way to gracefully transition toward harmony. With each challenge assertion from the board, I felt our collective resolve solidify. They were being laid bare, exposed as the barriers that had long kept us apart. Finally, the president offered a hesitant acknowledgement. We see your commitment and understand your points. While we cannot make any guarantees today, we will create a committee to explore this further with an established timeline. It was not a complete victory, but it was a crack that could potentially explode into a breakthrough message. We had forced them to bend slightly, and now we had to press forward with that advantage. As the meeting adjourned, elation surged through our ranks. It might not have been a full triumph, but it lit a fire beneath us, a fire that would continue to burn as we rallied together, pushing back against the daunting prospect of bureaucratic stagnation. The work was far from over, but each step brought us closer to reclaiming the joy of living in a community that celebrated diversity and resilience. If you resonate with this struggle and see the beauty in community efforts, don't hesitate to leave a comment. I knew this was just the beginning, the dawn of a new chapter in our fight for freedom against the outdated paradigm. Together, we would seize that moment and make the most of it. And I couldn't help but wonder about the lengths the HOA would take in their next maneuver to undermine our momentum. Little did they know, the passion for gardening had already begun to take root within our community, and we were ready to weather any storm they conjured up. The moment we had been waiting for finally arrived, the Community Garden Committee meeting. As I gathered my materials, a bubbling mix of excitement and anxiety coursed through me. After weeks of relentless preparation, we had not only managed to secure the HOA's willingness to consider our proposals, but we had also efficiently organized our message. This was our time to shine, to take the stand and persuade them to allow our community to flourish through our garden initiative. But it became clear that the stakes were even higher than I initially imagined. The room buzzed with anticipation as my neighbors took their seats, all wearing their signature garden hats, ready to show solidarity. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me for their commitment and bravery in standing up for a cause that had long been suppressed. As we exchanged nods and whispered concerns about the board members, I couldn't help but notice the differences in how the board presented themselves this time. They were guarded and distant, their previous swagger noticeably dampened. As the meeting commenced, the board president's demeanor was markedly different from previous encounters. Instead of the typical condescending tone, he started with a forced smile and a soothing voice. Thank you all for coming today. We appreciate your passion and commitment to enhancing our community. We're here to explore the garden initiative you've proposed. A flicker of hope traveled through me as I realized that our time had finally come. But then, the board members began to voice their skepticism again, almost as if it were a reflex. While we understand the enthusiasm for gardens, there are logistical concerns we need to address. One board member chimed in. This wasn't going to be as straightforward as I hoped, but I knew our persistence could break through their defenses. I took a deep breath and proceeded to outline our vision with practiced detail. We're not merely asking for permission to garden. We're advocating for a community-wide movement to cultivate not only plants but relationships. The benefits we propose are real and measurable: improve property values, enhance community spirit, and hands-on experiences for our children. Residents began to chime in, adding their voices to strengthen my case. Carol spoke about the feelings of isolation she had experienced due to the HOA's past tactics, how hopeful she felt witnessing the solidarity we'd fostered. Another neighbor, Jack, passionately recounted how gardening had become a bonding ritual in his family, highlighting their shared experiences. Together, we wove a narrative that could not be ignored. However, the board did not easily relent. They were entrenched in their bureaucratic mindset, throwing proverbial legal jargon as a counterbalance to our emotional appeals. Regulations exist for a reason. Who will maintain these gardens? What happens if certain identities are cultivated? Asked one member, voice edged with contempt. In that moment, I leaned in. This was my battleground, and I was ready to contest every ambiguous concern with facts and passion. We will self-govern. I emphasized. We're willing to manage and maintain the gardens, create community guidelines, and establish oversight. We are asking for your faith in our ability to manage ourselves, to break free from the chains of inflexible rules that only serve to divide us. As I implored the board to see us as allies rather than adversaries, I noticed some board members starting to soften. I seized a moment and, while addressing them, made eye contact with each member, emphasizing solidarity through unity. Yet, as the meeting progressed, an unsettling realization started to take root. It became evident that the board had not been entirely genuine in their receptivity to our proposals. They had conveniently formed their committee on community gardening and were now looking to control the narrative around it. While they entertained our aspirations, they displayed a growing urgency to implement stringent regulations that could ultimately suffocate our hopes. Suddenly, the board's president interrupted. We appreciate the information you provided, but we need to consider our regulatory standards first and foremost. We will consider proposing a tightly regulated garden framework, one that might restrict certain plants and dictate strict hours of access. A wave of murmurs swept through the room, a clash of concern and dissent brewing amongst residents. My stomach knotted at their patronizing approach. They were attempting the age-old tactic of dividing us by wrapping our aspirations in red tape until they suffocated. Under the guise of due diligence lay a systematic attempt to undermine our grassroots vision. I turned to my fellow neighbors and saw their frustration mirrored in my expression. This was a moment to unite further, to push back against the board's patronizing tactics. Regulations should not restrict our desire to engage with the land and each other. I yelled, emboldened by the room's energy. If we adhere to rules created with fear and distrust, what does that say about us? This garden initiative deserves the chance to thrive. I could see several faces nodding, encouragement spreading throughout the room. It was clear we needed to pose ourselves as more than mere petitioners. We were allies in a burgeoning movement to reclaim our connection. The board's grip was starting to loosen. When I finished, I dared to glance at my neighbors, our eyes locked in shared determination. Just as the discussion swelled, I felt an undeniable shift in energy. We wouldn't let the board's tightening grip extinguish the fire we had ignited. After a moment of charged silence, one brave soul finally cried out for unity. Let's schedule a follow-up meeting where we can come back prepared to address each of their concerns individually. Let's not let their concerns spiral out of control. This prompted a cascade of agreement among the residents, enthusiasm flaring as we collectively acknowledged the grit it will require to persevere. The meeting concluded with promises of further dialogue, but as we filed out into the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Despite the progress, the HOA wasn't done. They would counter us, undoubtedly mobilizing their resources to reassert control. This wasn't just about a garden anymore. It was a fight for every ounce of autonomy we were denied. But even so, the spirit of community had never felt more alive. As I glanced back at my neighbors, wrought with passion and determination, I knew we were ready for whatever came next. We had built momentum together, and we would not back down or be silenced again. The battle lines may have been drawn, but we stood resolute in our quest for a garden and our shared future. As the weeks unfolded into a flurry of strategic meetings and community solidarity, I found myself at the center of an unexpected movement. With each gathering, we were not only sharing our aspirations, but also solidifying our united front against the HOA's rigid control. By creating a web of support, we became a bastion of resilience, igniting a fire in our neighbors who had long felt isolated under the weight of oppressive regulations. But with that energy came an undeniable tension. The HOA was watching and waiting, strategizing their next move. The day of the final presentation approached with palpable energy in the air. Our community had rallied behind the idea of the garden with every ounce of enthusiasm we could muster. But as I prepared my notes, I couldn't shake the nagging thought of what the HOA might throw at us next. Their retaliatory tactics had become a vicious cycle, so I made it my mission to turn those tactics against them. I needed to play their game and outsmart them at their own rules. The buzz of anticipation filled the conference room of the HOA as my neighbors and I gathered for the meeting. Everyone was on high alert and ready to present our case with the unwavering resolve we'd built as a community. This time felt different. We had reasoned with facts, heartfelt testimonials, and now, a growing belief that we were not just looking to implement a garden, but to reclaim our voices as homeowners. When I stood to present, I felt the weight of every person in that room behind me, an army united in pursuit of our rights. I detailed our compelling proposal once again, re-emphasizing the economic and societal benefits of a community garden. As I spoke, I recalled the stories we had shared, the laughter and tears that had solidified our connection. We weren't just fighting for a piece of land. We were advocating for community connection and the freedom to flourish. Imagine families gathering for education, for nourishment, and for joy. I emphasized, we want our children to understand where their food comes from, to feel the earth beneath their fingertips, and to bond with their neighbors through collaborative efforts. A garden can be the beating heart of our neighborhood. My voice unwavering, it echoed through the room, gathering momentum as the energy intensified. But with every grain of hope, the HOA board grew increasingly defensive. The president once again threw up his walls. While your dreams are admirable, we have to consider legal ramifications. Our bylaws exist for reasons you may not entirely appreciate. His words buzzed with condescension, attempting again to reassert their authority. Yet, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes that I had never seen before. I pressed on, and what are the personal connections in our community? We are proposing a solution to bring us together, not pull us apart. Regulating our interests without understanding our desires destroys community spirit. Are we not worth that effort? The pressure was building. It was clear to the board that we were not backing down. They could feel the tide shifting, and I was ready to give the final push. The most powerful moment came unexpectedly when one of my neighbors, a quiet woman who had rarely spoken in our gatherings, stood up. I've lived here for 30 years, and I've watched our vibrant community fade into fear. All I've ever wanted was a connection to my neighbors, to know that my home wasn't just a shell, but a living space filled with joy, she began. Her voice cracked slightly as she continued. I want to leave something meaningful for my grandchildren, not just a lawn they have to maintain. Tears glistened in her eyes, and it struck a chord throughout the room. Suddenly, applause erupted. Almost everyone joined in, echoing her sentiment. An eruption of enthusiasm rattled the framework of the HOA's stoic facade as more neighbors stood up to voice their support. I could see the board members becoming flustered, losing their typically composed demeanor. The foundation of community has always resided in its people. If you care about our property values and community spirit, you will support this initiative, I pressed, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Finally, a woman from the board, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. We understand your passion, and it is admirable, she said, looking thoughtfully around the room. But we need to approach this carefully. Perhaps we can form a trial committee, created from both the HOA and community residents, to oversee the garden's progress. It wouldn't just be a step for your garden. It would set a precedent. As I gathered my breath, I noticed boards shifting, a surprise glimmer of potential acceptance on the table. It wasn't definitive, yes, but I sensed that this was a path worth following, one that might lead us to something greater than any singular garden. The final vote came, and word by word, the approval was affirmed. We did it. We had triumphed what felt like an uphill battle against an oppressive force that had silenced our voices for far too long. As we walked out of that meeting, I felt a sense of catharsis wash over me. We had fought back, and even if it was just a small win, it mattered. The sense of community we had built felt like the roots of our garden, deep and firm. In that neighborhood, the war with the HOA was over. But for those who know the system from the inside, they know there's always another committee president somewhere who thinks they're above the law. Subscribe to the channel and watch the absurd story that occurred at another HOA. Click on the video that's